The chamber stretched upward for what seemed like miles, its walls alive with shifting patterns of light that represented every star system under Concordance authority. Ambassador Marcus Raid stood at the center of a circular platform, surrounded by ascending tiers of seats where representatives from 423 different species watched him with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed hostility. The air processors hummed at frequencies designed to accommodate dozens of different atmospheric requirements, creating an unsettling harmony that made his teeth ache. This was the heart of galactic power. The Grand Assembly of the Concordance, where decisions affecting trillions of beings were made daily. And today, they were deciding what to do about humanity. Marcus forced himself to stand perfectly still as High Chancellor Veller approached the central podium. The Chancellor was a Thrain, a species that resembled an enormous mantis constructed from living crystal. Light refracted through his body in dizzying patterns, and when he spoke, his voice emerged from translation devices embedded throughout the chamber. The human delegation stands accused of technological fraud and military deception, Veller announced, his crystalline fingers clicking against the podium. 3 standard months ago, your species petitioned for membership in the Concordance. You presented yourselves as a developing civilization, technologically primitive, militarily insignificant. You requested protection, trade agreements, and cultural exchange. All of this was granted in good faith. Marcus felt Lieutenant Torres shift slightly behind him, the only other human allowed in the chamber. Somewhere in the detention levels below, the rest of Earth's diplomatic mission waited in sealed quarters, cut off from all communication. Then came the incident at Broken Vale Station, Veller continued. A holographic display materialized above the chamber, showing the civilian mining platform hanging in space like a small city. When Ravager clans attacked this neutral facility, killing thousands, it was expected that Concordance defense forces would respond. But they were 14 hours away, too far to help. The hologram showed Ravager warships descending on the station, their weapons tearing through hull plating like paper. Evacuation pods scattered into the void, many of them destroyed before they could reach safety. Marcus had watched this footage dozens of times, but seeing it displayed as evidence of humanity's crimes rather than heroism made his jaw clench. A human vessel happened to be nearby, Veller said, and the way he emphasized happened made it sound like an accusation. The CSS Defiant, registered as a scientific research ship. Crew complement of 147. No weapons listed in its registry beyond basic defensive systems. The hologram shifted to show the Defiant emerging from behind the station's docking ring. She was small by galactic standards, utilitarian in design, almost ugly compared to the elegant curves of Concordance vessels. But Marcus felt a surge of pride looking at her. That ugly little ship had saved 20,000 lives. What happened next had changed everything. Defiant's weapons came online, and 3 Ravager destroyers simply ceased to exist. Railgun rounds moving at impossible velocities punched through shields and armor like they were nothing. The remaining Ravager ships turned to face this new threat, unleashing enough firepower to reduce a small moon to dust. Defiant danced through the attack like a fighter instead of a research vessel. Her defensive systems created overlapping fields of protection that the Concordance's finest scientists still couldn't fully explain. Point defense lasers destroyed incoming missiles with surgical precision. And then her counterattack began in earnest dot in 6 minutes. 14 Ravager warships became expanding clouds of debris. The Defiant sustained minor damage to her outer hull. 0 casualties among her crew. The chamber erupted in a chaos of alien sounds as the footage ended. Clicking, hissing, harmonic resonances that Marcus's translator couldn't fully process. He stood silent, waiting for order to be restored. "You lied to us," said Representative Korth of the Vryn Collective, her 6 eyes blinking in sequence. "You claimed weakness while hiding strength. This is exactly the kind of deception that leads to war. We never lied, Marcus said, his voice cutting through the noise with surprising clarity. The chamber fell silent. We provided complete technical specifications for all our civilian vessels and defensive installations. Everything was documented and submitted to the Concordance Technology Council. Semantics, Korth hissed. You allowed us to believe you were harmless. We never claimed to be harmless, Marcus replied. We said we were peaceful. There's a difference. We told you our ships carried kinetic accelerators, directed energy weapons, and defensive countermeasures. We never said those systems were ineffective just because the underlying principles are old. A knife doesn't become less sharp because it's a simple tool. High Chancellor Veller's crystal body flashed with what might have been irritation. You are one planet, Ambassador Reed, one small world with 8 billion inhabitants. Yet your single research vessel destroyed a Ravager attack force that would require a full Concordance battle group to defeat. How do you explain this discrepancy? Marcus took a slow breath. This was the moment that would determine everything. Necessity, he said simply. The Concordance has enjoyed peace for 3,000 years. You've had time to develop culture, art, philosophy. You build ships that look like sculptures because you can afford to value beauty over function. Humanity doesn't have that luxury yet. What do you mean? Asked a delegate from the Sroth Dominion, its serpentine body coiling with interest. We've been killing each other for our entire history, Marcus said bluntly, and heard Torres's sharp intake of breath behind him. But there was no point in hiding it now. Wars over resources, territory, ideology, religion. We split the atom and immediately used it as a weapon. We reached space because we were building missiles to throw at each other and realized we could aim higher. Every technology we develop, we ask the same question. How can this keep us alive when everything else wants us dead? The chamber had gone completely silent. Hundreds of alien eyes watched him with expressions he couldn't read. The CSS Defiant is a research vessel, Marcus continued. She researches how to keep humans alive in hostile environments, including environments where someone is actively trying to kill us. That's not deception. That's survival instinct, refined over 200,000 years of evolution on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. You prove our point, Veller said quietly. You are dangerous, unpredictable. You think like predators, not civilized beings. Maybe, Marcus acknowledged. But when the Ravagers attacked Broken Vale, where were your civilized fleets? Your advanced defenses? Your 3,000 years of peace? He let the question hang in the air. You called for help. We answered. And now you want to punish us for being capable of answering effectively. Representative Korth leaned forward, her translator making her voice sharp as broken glass. There is another matter. The human who boarded the Ravager command ship and disabled it from within. Lieutenant Commander Kyla Wright. Our medical scans reveal she is 47% synthetic by mass. Cybernetic augmentation integrated at the neural level. She is a hybrid intelligence, possibly violating our strictest laws regarding artificial consciousness. The chamber erupted again, louder this time. Marcus felt the weight of 423 species worth of fear and anger pressing down on him. Lieutenant Wright is human, he said firmly. She was born on Earth. She has parents, memories, dreams. The fact that she's chosen to augment her natural abilities doesn't make her less human. It makes her better equipped to protect people who can't protect themselves. How many others like her exist in your military? Demanded a delegate Marcus didn't recognize. Enough, Marcus said, and realized his mistake instantly as the chamber exploded with alarm. High Chancellor Veller raised his crystalline arms, and silence gradually returned. Ambassador Reed, do you understand the position you've put us in? The Concordance was built on principles of transparency, cooperation, and mutual defense. You violated all three within months of making contact. We cannot allow a species with your capabilities and your deceptive nature to remain among us. So this is a trial where you've already decided the verdict. Marcus said quietly. This is a deliberation to determine how to proceed, Veller corrected. Expulsion from the Concordance. Technological sanctions. Quarantine of your home system. These are all being considered. And if we refuse to accept your judgment? The question seemed to surprise Veller. His crystal body flickered with rapid color changes. You are 3 humans on a station, surrounded by the military forces of 423 allied species. Earth is 8 light years away. What could you possibly refuse? Marcus smiled, though there was no humor in it. High Chancellor, you're absolutely right. We're outnumbered, outgunned, and completely at your mercy. But you're making one critical mistake, which is, you're assuming we came here hoping for mercy. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Marcus saw Torres's hand move subtly toward her sidearm, a gesture small that probably no one else noticed. But he knew what it meant. His security chief was ready for whatever came next. Are you threatening this, eh? Assembly? Korth demanded, rising from her seat. I'm stating a fact, Marcus replied calmly. Humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and our own worst impulses. We've done it by being honest about what we are. We're not perfect. We're not peaceful by nature. But we're survivors, and we're loyal to those who stand with us. The crew of the Defiant saved 20,000 Concordant citizens without hesitation, without asking for payment or favors. That's what humanity offers, the willingness to fight for those who can't fight for themselves. Pretty words, Veller said, but they don't change the facts. You deceived us about your capabilities. No, Marcus said. You deceived yourselves. You saw a young species and assumed weakness. You saw old technologies and assumed primitive. You made those assumptions because it was comfortable, because it let you stay in control. He gestured at the vast chamber around them. This whole place is built on the idea that you're in charge, that you set the rules, that everyone else follows. We're just the first species to show up to remind you that power and authority aren't the same thing. The silence that followed was different from before. Not shocked or angry, but calculating. Marcus could see it in the way the delegates looked at each other, in the subtle movements and signals passing between species who'd worked together for millennia. They were afraid. And fear made people dangerous. Take them to detention, Veller said finally. The assembly will deliberate in private. We will announce our decision within 24 standard hours. As armed guards approached, Marcus caught Torres's eye and gave the smallest shake of his head. Not yet, not here. They allowed themselves to be escorted from the chamber, down corridors lined with material that seemed to drink in light, past checkpoints staffed by security forces from a dozen different species. In the detention level, they were separated. Marcus was led to a cell that looked more like a hotel room, complete with furniture adapted for human physiology. The door sealed behind him with a sound like a sigh. He sat on the edge of the bed and waited. Somewhere above, 423 species were deciding humanity's fate. On Earth, 8 billion people went about their lives, most of them unaware that first contact had turned into a diplomatic crisis. And in the corridors of Concordant Central Station, pieces were moving on a board that Marcus could only partially see. Whatever happened next, the galaxy was about to learn something important about humanity. They were very difficult to kill, and even harder to control. Commander Vex of the Krulvan Empire had fought in 17 major battles across 4 different star systems. His carapace bore scars from plasma burns, kinetic impacts, and one memorable encounter with a Ravager boarding party that had cost him his left primary arm. The cybernetic replacement worked perfectly. But he still missed the original on cold days, when phantom pains reminded him of what he'd lost. He was a war hero by any standard, decorated by the Concordance Military Council 3 times for valor under fire. His crew respected him. His superiors trusted him. And right now, standing in the detention-level observation room, watching the human ambassador sleep in his cell, Vex felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service. Doubt. Still watching the primitives? Asked Lieutenant Venn, entering the observation room with 2 cups of stimulant beverage. The young officer's scales were still bright green, unmarred by combat. Fresh from academy, assigned to Concordance Central as a reward for high test scores. Vex accepted the cup without looking away from the monitor. They're not primitive. That's the problem. They're barely into their 2nd century of spaceflight, Venn said dismissively. No faster-than-light capability of their own. Chemical rockets and nuclear pulse engines. My ancestors were building warp gates when these humans were still throwing rocks at each other. And yet their research vessel destroyed 14 Ravager warships in 6 minutes, Vex said quietly. How long would it take you to do the same, Lieutenant? Venn's scales shifted to a darker shade. That's different. The Ravagers are disorganized raiders, not a real military force. The Ravagers have been raiding Concordance space for 70 years, Vex countered. We lose ships to them regularly. Stations get attacked every few months. Just last year, they destroyed a military convoy and killed 400 Concordance soldiers. He gestured at the monitor. These humans, with their primitive technology, eliminated an attack force without taking a single casualty. That deserves respect, not dismissal. The Council doesn't see it that way, Venn said. They're voting right now on expulsion protocols, probably adding military sanctions, maybe even a quarantine of the human home system. Vex's mandibles clicked in frustration. He'd attended the assembly session, watched Ambassador Reed stand alone against 423 species worth of accusations. The human hadn't flinched, hadn't begged, hadn't even tried to minimize what his species was capable of. Instead, he'd been honest about it. Almost defiant. It reminded Vex of something he'd been trying not to think about for the past 3 months. I need to review the Broken Veil incident data again, he said abruptly. Venn's scales flickered with confusion. Commander, you've reviewed it a dozen times already. What are you looking for? Inconsistencies, Vex said, though that wasn't quite true. He was looking for confirmation of a suspicion that had been growing in his mind since he'd first seen the footage of the human ship in action. He left Venn in the observation room and made his way to the military intelligence archives 3 levels down. The corridors of Concordance Central were unusually quiet. Most personnel were either attending the assembly session or monitoring it remotely. The fate of an entire species didn't happen every day. The archives were empty except for the AI custodian, a distributed intelligence that managed the vast databases of military intelligence gathered over 3,000 years of Concordance history. Vex accessed his command codes and pulled up everything related to the Broken Veil incident. The footage began again, but this time Vex ignored the dramatic destruction of the Ravager ships. Instead, he focused on the smaller details, the way the human vessel moved, the targeting solutions it calculated, the coordination between its various weapon systems. He slowed the playback to 1/10 speed and watched the Defiance point defense lasers track and destroy incoming missiles. The precision was remarkable, but it was the reaction time that made his blood run cold. The lasers were firing before the missiles were fully clear of their launch tubes, anticipating trajectories that shouldn't have been predictable. Either the humans had sensors far beyond anything the Concordance possessed, or they had something else, something the Council was too afraid to acknowledge. Vex pulled up a second file, this one classified at the highest levels. A medical scan of Lieutenant Commander Kayla Wright, the human who had boarded the Ravager command ship during the battle. The scan showed a body that was simultaneously organic and synthetic. Neural implants that connected directly to her brain's motor cortex. Artificial muscle fibers woven through natural tissue. Subdermal armor plating. A secondary power source installed where her appendix used to be. And most impressive of all, a quantum processing unit integrated into her cerebral cortex that enhanced her cognitive speed by factors the Concordance's best cybernetics could only dream of achieving. She wasn't just augmented. She was enhanced beyond what should have been biologically possible. Vex pulled up his own medical files for comparison. His cybernetic arm was sophisticated by Concordance standards, with neural interface technology that let him control it almost as naturally as his original limb. But compared to what the humans had done to themselves, it was like comparing a stone axe to a plasma rifle. "This is what scares them," he muttered to himself. Not the weapons. The integration. The Concordance had strict laws about cybernetic enhancement, laws written in the aftermath of the synthetic uprising 600 years ago. Artificial intelligences had nearly destroyed 3 species before being contained. The trauma of that war had led to treaties and restrictions that every member species followed without question. Prosthetic limbs were acceptable. Medical implants to replace damaged organs were permitted. But enhancement beyond natural biological limits was forbidden. The line between helping the injured and creating something more than organic was considered sacred. The humans had crossed that line so far they couldn't even see it anymore. X was about to close the files when something caught his attention. A footnote in the medical scan, barely noticeable unless you knew what to look for. Lieutenant Wright's cybernetic enhancements included a communications interface capable of establishing direct neural links with compatible systems. He pulled up the Ravager command ship's logs, recovered from the wreckage after the battle. The ship had been disabled from within, its core systems shut down in a cascade failure that looked almost surgical in its precision. The Ravagers had assumed it was a virus, some kind of cyber warfare weapon the humans had deployed. But what if it wasn't a weapon at all? What if Lieutenant Wright had simply connected to the ship's computer and turned it off like someone flipping a light switch? The implications made Vex's combat-hardened mind reel. The Concordance used computer systems, of course. Every ship, every station, every piece of advanced technology relied on artificial intelligence to function. But there were always barriers between organic minds and synthetic ones. Safety protocols, restrictions, delays, inherent in biological reaction times trying to interface with electronic speeds the humans had eliminated. Those barriers by making themselves partially synthetic. Vex heard footsteps in the corridor outside and quickly closed the classified files. Captain Yoren entered, her luminous skin pulsing with the blue tones that indicated stress in her species. "Commander Vex, I need your assessment for the military council," she said without preamble. "They're finalizing recommendations for how to handle the human situation." "What are the current proposals?" Vex asked carefully. "Immediate expulsion from Concordance space. Prohibition on human vessels entering any member system. Military blockade of their home world if they refuse to comply with technology restrictions." Yoren's skin flickered darker. "Some delegates are pushing for preemptive action to eliminate their military capabilities before they become a threat." "Preemptive action," Vex repeated. "You mean war." "I mean neutralization of a potential threat before it can harm Concordance citizens," Yoren corrected, though her tone suggested she didn't believe the distinction herself. Vex considered his next words carefully. Yoren was a friend, someone he'd served with for decades. But she was also loyal to the Concordance above all else. What he was about to say could be considered treason. Captain, have you reviewed the complete tactical data from Broken Vale? Of course. The humans demonstrated capabilities far beyond what they disclosed. Did you notice their target selection? Dex pulled up the footage again, highlighting specific moments. The Defiant didn't just destroy the Ravager ships. It disabled them in a specific sequence designed to minimize collateral damage to the station. 3 of the destroyers were destroyed outright because their positions made them immediate threats to civilian evacuation pods. The others were disabled with precision strikes that left their reactors intact, preventing catastrophic explosions that would have showered the station with radiation. Urine studied the footage with new attention. I hadn't noticed that. Most people didn't, Dex said. They just saw overwhelming force and assumed aggression. But this wasn't a display of power. It was a rescue operation, executed with minimal necessary force. The humans could have vaporized every Ravager ship instantly, but they chose the approach that would save the most lives, even at greater risk to themselves. What's your point, Commander? My point is that we're making the same mistake we always make, Dex said. We see something different, something we don't understand, and we label it as dangerous. But what if the humans aren't a threat? What if they're exactly what we need? Yoren's skin flashed red, the color of alarm. Need? Commander, they violated fundamental concordance laws regarding synthetic intelligence. They've demonstrated military capabilities that exceed our own, while pretending to be weak. They're unpredictable, aggressive, and completely foreign to everything the concordance represents. Yes, Dex agreed. They are. And when was the last time the concordance won a significant military engagement without suffering massive casualties? The question hung between them like an accusation. Yoren's skin cycled through several colors before settling on a muddy gray that indicated confusion. We maintain peace, she said finally. The concordance military exists to defend our citizens and deter aggression. We maintain peace by avoiding conflict, Dex corrected. When the Ravagers attack, we respond slowly and cautiously. When pirates raid trade convoys, we negotiate rather than fight. We've become so afraid of war that we've forgotten how to win one. He gestured at the frozen image of the Defiant on the screen. These humans remember. They know how to fight, how to win, and most importantly, how to do it without becoming monsters in the process. You're defending them, Yoren said. Her tone caught between disbelief and accusation. I'm being honest about what I see, Dex replied. The humans saved 20,000 Concordance citizens without hesitation. They didn't ask for payment. They didn't demand concessions. They just acted because it was the right thing to do. And now we're punishing them for being capable of helping us. Yoren was silent for a long moment. Her skin gradually shifted to a pale green, the color of deep thought in her species. The Council won't see it that way. They're too afraid. Fear is useful in combat, Dex said. It keeps you alert, helps you survive. But fear in politics just makes you cruel. What do you suggest we do? I don't know yet, Dex admitted. But I know we're making a mistake. And I know that mistakes made out of fear tend to be the kind that start wars rather than prevent them. Yoren's skin flickered through several colors before settling on amber, the shade of uncertainty. I'll include your assessment in my report. But Commander, be careful. What you're suggesting sounds dangerously close to advocating for the humans against the Concordance. That won't end well for your career. I've had a long career, Dex said quietly, and I've earned enough decorations to speak my mind. If that costs me rank, so be it. After Yoren left, Dex returned to studying the data. There was something else here, something he was missing. The humans had been too prepared, too capable for a species that claimed to have just achieved interstellar travel. They'd known exactly what they were doing at Broken Vale, moved with the confidence of experienced combat veterans. Despite claiming this was their first major engagement, he pulled up Earth's historical database. Publicly available information the humans had, provided during their application for Concordance membership. Wars, thousands of them, stretching back through recorded history. Not just tribal conflicts or territorial disputes, but massive industrial wars that consumed entire continents. World wars that killed millions. Cold wars where annihilation hung over the species like a sword, and yet they'd survived all of it. Every war, every disaster, every self-inflicted catastrophe. They'd survived and kept building, kept reaching, kept pushing forward. Vex thought about his own species, the Krelvan Empire. They'd achieved spaceflight 2,000 years ago, joined the Concordance shortly after, and had lived in relative peace ever since. Conflicts were rare, wars almost unknown. They'd grown comfortable, safe, content. Soft. Thought was disloyal, but Vex couldn't shake it. The Concordance had brought peace and prosperity to hundreds of species, but it had also taken away the edge that came from struggle. They'd forgotten how to fight, because they'd forgotten why fighting sometimes mattered. The humans hadn't forgotten. They'd probably never forget, not in 1,000 years of peace, his communicator chirped. The assembly session was ending. A vote had been taken. Vex made his way to the observation deck, overlooking the Grand Assembly chamber, arriving just as High Chancellor Veller announced the results. The human delegation was being expelled from Concordance space immediately. Their vessels would be escorted to the border and prohibited from returning. Earth would be placed under technological sanctions, forbidden from acquiring Concordance technology or establishing trade agreements with member species. And if humanity refused to accept these terms, military force was authorized to ensure compliance. Vex watched Ambassador Reed receive the news with the same calm expression he'd maintained throughout the trial. No anger, no pleading, just acceptance of what was happening. But there was something else in the human's eyes. Something Vex recognized from his own reflection after particularly difficult battles. Calculation. The humans had expected this outcome. They'd prepared for it. And somehow, that was more frightening than anything else. The detention cell's communication terminal activated precisely at midnight station time, and Marcus Reed wasn't surprised. He'd been expecting this ever since the Assembly's verdict had been announced 6 hours ago. What did surprise him was who appeared on the screen. Director Patricia Walsh, head of Earth's Department of Interstellar Relations, looked tired. The timestamp on the transmission showed it had been sent 8 hours ago, meaning she'd recorded it immediately after receiving word of the Concordance's decision. The delay was unavoidable when communicating across 8 light years, but it meant every word of this conversation would be hours out of date by the time replies arrived. "Marcus," she said, and he could hear the weight in her voice. "By the time you receive this, you'll already know about the sanctions. We've been monitoring the assembly session through diplomatic channels. I'm sorry we couldn't do more to prevent this outcome." Marcus said nothing. The recording would continue regardless of his response. "The President has convened an emergency session of the Security Council," Patricia continued. "We have 14 hours before Concordance escort vessels arrive to remove you from Central Station. That gives us time to coordinate a response, but we need to know what you've learned. What are we really dealing with here?" She paused, as if hoping for an answer that wouldn't come for hours. Then she continued, "Earth's position is clear. We will not accept technological sanctions or restrictions on our development. We will not submit to monitoring or inspection of our military capabilities. And we absolutely will not allow a blockade of our home system." Her expression hardened. "But we also understand the reality of our situation. We're one planet against an alliance of 423 species. Even with our technological advantages, we can't win a full-scale war against those numbers." Marcus leaned forward, watching Patricia's face carefully. There was something else coming, something she was building toward. So we need to know what you think, Marcus. You've spent 3 months among them. You've observed their politics, their military capabilities, their social structures. In your professional assessment, are we looking at a unified threat, or is there a way to divide them? There it was. The real question. Not whether Earth could survive the Concordance's sanctions, but whether they could break the Alliance apart before it became necessary to fight. Marcus walked to the terminal and began recording his reply, knowing it wouldn't reach Earth until long after events here had already progressed beyond this moment. Director Walsh, the Concordance isn't as unified as they pretend to be, he said carefully. 423 species sounds impressive, until you realize most of them have minimal military capability and vote, however, the major powers tell them to. The real authority rests with about 20 species, and even those have competing interests. He pulled up a data file on his personal tablet, one he'd been compiling since arriving at Central Station. The Thrain Ascendancy controls the Council through economic leverage. They're the primary manufacturers of faster-than-light drive components, which gives them enormous influence. But they're not warriors. They avoid conflict whenever possible. The Krelvan Empire has the largest military fleet, but they're spread thin trying to patrol Concordance space against raiders and pirates. They're good soldiers, but they think defensively. Their entire strategic doctrine is built around protecting what they have, not taking what they want. The Vryn Collective controls most of the trade routes and has the best intelligence network. They know everything that happens in Concordance space, but they're risk-averse. They won't support military action unless they're absolutely certain of the outcome. Marcus highlighted several other species in his analysis, noting their strengths, weaknesses, and political allegiances. Then he came to the critical point. The fear we're seeing isn't really about our weapons or our capabilities. It's about control. The Concordance has maintained peace for 3,000 years by ensuring everyone follows the same rules. We've demonstrated that we don't need their rules to be effective. And that terrifies them because it suggests their entire system might be built on assumptions rather than necessity. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. There's a faction within the Concordance military that's sympathetic to our position. Not pro-human necessarily, but frustrated with the current approach to security. Commander Thex of the Krelvan Empire has been studying our tactics. Captain Yoren has been asking questions about our training methods. They're not allies yet, but they're not enemies either. My recommendation is this. Don't wait for them to enforce the sanctions. Make it clear immediately that we won't comply, but frame it as defending our sovereignty rather than challenging their authority. Force them to make the next move, and make sure that move is visible to their entire population. The Concordance citizens generally support peaceful integration. If they see their leaders starting a war against a species that saved 20,000 civilians, it will create political pressure. Marcus glanced at the time. He had maybe 10 minutes before his access to the communication system would be revoked. There's something else you need to know, he said. The Concordance has detailed scans of Lieutenant Wright's augmentations. They understand the implications of human-eye integration better than we might think. Some of their senior military officers are looking at our capabilities and seeing solutions to problems they've had for centuries. If we play this right, we might be able to create a split between the Concordance's political leadership and their military command. He was about to end the transmission when his door chimed. Marcus closed the connection quickly and moved away from the terminal just as the door slid open. Commander Thex stood in the corridor, his cybernetic arm hanging at his side in a gesture that might have been meant as non-threatening. 2 guards flanked him, but they remained outside as the Krelvan officer entered alone. Ambassador Reed, Thex said, his translator rendering his clicking speech into accented English. I apologize for the late hour. Commander, Marcus replied carefully. I wasn't expecting visitors. I thought the verdict meant immediate isolation. It does, X confirmed. But I have security clearance that allows me certain privileges. I needed to speak with you before you're removed from the station. Marcus gestured to the room's single chair, but X remained standing. The Krelvin's carapace was scarred from old wounds, and his cybernetic arm bore decorations that Marcus recognized as military honors. You're a war hero, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. I've fought in battles, X replied. Whether that makes me a hero is a different question. He moved to the window overlooking the docking bays. I've been reviewing the data from Broken Veil, the tactical decisions your ship made, the precision of your weapons, the integration between your crew and your ship's systems. And I understand why the Council is afraid, Vex said bluntly. You're not just technologically advanced. You're experienced in ways we've forgotten how to be. The Concordance has had peace for so long that we've lost the instincts that keep civilizations alive in a hostile universe. Marcus said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. Vex turned from the window to face him directly. But I also understand why you didn't disclose your full capabilities. You were protecting yourselves. Any species that reveals weakness in first contact risks exploitation. You showed us enough to be respected, but not enough to be seen as an immediate threat. It was sound strategy. The Council doesn't see it that way, Marcus observed. The Council is making a mistake, Vex said, and there was steel in his voice. They're so concerned with maintaining control that they're willing to turn a potential ally into an enemy. I've seen this pattern before, in smaller conflicts. It never ends well. Marcus studied the Krelvin officer carefully. This wasn't a casual conversation. Vex was risking his career, possibly his freedom, by being here. Why are you telling me this, Commander? Because I need you to understand something before you leave, Vex said. The Concordance isn't monolithic. There are officers like me who see the value in what humanity offers. There are politicians who understand that innovation sometimes requires breaking old rules. There are citizens who are inspired by what your crew did at Broken Veil. But they're not in charge, Marcus said. Not yet, Vex agreed. But the Council's decision to impose sanctions on your species will be unpopular with many, especially when word spreads about how you saved Concordance citizens without asking for anything in return. Public opinion matters, even in a civilization as old as ours. Marcus felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. You want us to resist the sanctions publicly, to make this a visible confrontation rather than a quiet expulsion. Vex's mandibles clicked in what might have been approval. I want you to do whatever is best for your species. But yes, I believe a public confrontation would reveal divisions within the Concordance that currently remain hidden. And those divisions might create opportunities for both our peoples. You're suggesting we might find allies within the Concordance itself. I'm suggesting that not everyone agrees with the Council's decision, Vex said carefully. What happens next depends on how both sides handle this crisis. But Ambassador, you should know that if the Council decides to enforce the sanctions militarily, there will be consequences far beyond your single planet. War, Marcus said flatly. Realignment, Vex corrected. The Concordance has maintained unity through prosperity and mutual benefit. But if that unity requires suppressing species who refuse to submit to our rules, it becomes something else. Something less stable. The implications were staggering. Vex wasn't just offering sympathy. He was suggesting that humanity's resistance to the Concordance might trigger a larger crisis that could reshape galactic politics entirely. Why are you really here, Commander? Marcus asked again. Vex was silent for a long moment. Then he reached into his uniform and pulled out a small data chip. This contains tactical assessments of Concordance military deployments in the sectors near your home system. Force compositions, patrol patterns, response times. It's classified at the highest levels, and possessing it could be considered an act of treason. Marcus didn't reach for the chip. Why would you give me this? Because I'd spent my entire career fighting to protect the Concordance and its citizens, Vex said. And I've come to believe that the greatest threat to our survival isn't external enemies. It's our own complacency. Our assumption that peace is natural and will continue forever if we just avoid conflict. He placed the chip on the table between them. You humans understand something we've forgotten. That peace is something you have to fight for, not just maintain. And sometimes, fighting for peace means being willing to go to war. Marcus looked at the chip, then back at Vex. If I take this, you'll be branded a traitor. If you don't take it, people will die unnecessarily when the conflict begins, Vex replied. I've made my choice. Now you make yours. Marcus picked up the chip. The council will find out eventually. Probably, Vex agreed. But by then, it won't matter. Events are already in motion that neither of us can stop. The only question is whether those events lead to mutual destruction or mutual understanding. The Krelvan officer moved toward the door, then paused. Ambassador Reed, there's one more thing you should know. The council's vote wasn't unanimous. 47 species abstained, and 12 voted against the sanctions. It was reported as a united decision, but the cracks are already there. Your species didn't create this division. You just made it visible. After Vex left, Marcus sat alone in his cell, holding the data chip and thinking about everything that had just happened. The Concordance wasn't the monolithic threat Earth had feared. It was a fragile alliance held together by habit and self-interest, and humanity's arrival had exposed that fragility. The question was what to do with that knowledge. Earth could accept the sanctions, retreat to their home system, and build up their strength in isolation. Or they could fight, knowing that fighting might shatter the Concordance entirely and leave. The galaxy in chaos. Marcus activated the communication. Terminal one last time and began recording another message for Director Walsh. This one would be much longer and far more detailed. And somewhere on the other side of the galaxy, 8 billion humans waited to learn whether their first contact with alien civilization would end in alliance or war. The Concordance escort fleet arrived at Central Station exactly on schedule, 14 hours after the sanctions vote. 6 heavy cruisers and a command carrier, enough firepower to reduce a small moon to debris. Their mission was simple: ensure the human delegation departed peacefully and escort them to the edge of Concordance space. High Chancellor Veller watched from the command center as the fleet took up positions around the station. Everything was proceeding according to plan. The humans would be removed. Their vessels would be tracked until they crossed the border, and the Concordance would return to normal. The brief disruption caused by humanity's arrival would become a footnote in galactic history. Then the scanners detected something unexpected. Chancellor, said the operations officer, her luminous skin flickering with alarm. We're detecting multiple faster-than-light signatures emerging from hyperspace. Distance, 3 light hours and closing. Veller's crystalline body flashed with irritation. Identify them. Probably just merchant traffic that needs to be diverted around the security zone. The officer worked her console, and her skin went from alarm to shock. Chancellor, those aren't merchants. I'm reading military-grade power signatures, weapon systems charging, and the transponder codes. She looked up, her expression stunned. They're human vessels. 16 of them. The command center erupted in activity. Veller moved to the main display, where tactical data was already flowing in. 16 ships, each roughly the same size as the CSS Defiant, were approaching at high velocity. Their formation was precise. their trajectory calculated to bring them into weapons range of Central Station within 4 hours. That's impossible, Veller said, though the data didn't lie. Earth is 8 light years from here. Even with faster-than-light travel, they couldn't have received word of the sanctions and responded this quickly. Unless they were already en route, suggested Admiral Kent of the Krelvin fleet. His carapace bore the scars of a lifetime of combat, and his voice carried the weight of experience. They sent these ships before the verdict was announced. They knew what our decision would be. Veller felt something cold settle in his core. The humans had anticipated the Concordance's response and prepared accordingly. But that raised an even more disturbing question. If they expected sanctions and expulsion, he said slowly, why send a military fleet? This will only confirm everything the Council feared about their aggressive nature. Perhaps that's the point, Kent replied. We made our position clear. Now they're making theirs. The main view screen shifted to show Ambassador Reed being escorted to the docking bay by Concordance security forces. The human looked calm, almost serene, as if the approaching fleet was exactly what he'd been waiting for. Contact the human ambassador, Veller ordered. I want to know what they're planning. But before the communication could be established, every display in the command center switched to the same image, a middle-aged human woman in a military uniform, seated at a desk with Earth's planetary flag behind her. The feed was being broadcast on all frequencies. Impossible to block without shutting down the entire station's communication grid. I am General Rebecca Stone, Commander of Earth's Interstellar Defense Force, the woman said, her voice steady and clear. This message is being transmitted to all Concordance military and civilian channels. In approximately 4 hours, 16 vessels of the Earth Fleet will arrive at Central Station. These vessels are here to retrieve our diplomatic delegation and our citizens currently held in Concordance custody. Veller's body flashed with anger. This was a blatant violation of protocol, transmitting military communications without authorization. The Concordance Council has declared that Earth must submit to technological sanctions and accept restrictions on our sovereign development. General Stone continued, we reject these demands. Earth will not accept limitations on our right to defend ourselves, to develop our technology, or to determine our own future. We are a free people, and we will remain free. The command center had gone completely silent. Every officer, every technician, every delegate was watching the broadcast with expressions ranging from shock to fury. We did not seek conflict with the Concordance, Stone said. We came in peace, offering friendship and cooperation. We saved Concordance lives at Broken Vale without hesitation or expectation of reward. We have been honest about what we are and what we're capable of. If that honesty is unacceptable to you, then we will leave. But we will leave on our terms, not yours. The camera angle shifted slightly, and Veller realized with growing horror that Stone wasn't alone. Behind her stood rows of soldiers, each wearing powered armor that made them look like mechanical titans. Their weapons were clearly visible, as was the confidence in their bearing. Our fleet will arrive at Central Station in 4 hours, Stone repeated. We will retrieve our people and depart immediately. Any attempt to prevent this will be considered an act of war against Earth and her citizens. We hope the Concordance will choose wisdom over confrontation. But make no mistake, we are prepared for either outcome. The transmission ended, and normal communications resumed. The command center remained silent for several long seconds. They're threatening us, whispered a junior officer. On our own station, in the heart of Concordance space. No, Admiral Kent said quietly. They're setting boundaries. There's a difference. Veller turned to the Admiral. You think we should allow this? Let them dictate terms after violating every protocol we have? I think we should consider what happens if we don't, Kent replied. Those 16 ships are likely just as capable as the Defiant. Our escort fleet numbers 7 vessels. Even if we had numerical advantage, the tactical data from Broken Veil suggests human vessels are significantly more effective in combat than ours. We can call for reinforcements. Veller argued, which will take hours to arrive, during which time we'll be in a standoff with an enemy we know very little about, Kent said. And if shooting starts, we're sitting on a station with 14 million civilian inhabitants. Is protecting our pride worth risking their lives? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Veller knew the Admiral was right, but admitting it meant accepting that the Concordance's authority had just been challenged successfully. What do you recommend? He asked finally. Let them take their people and go, Kent said. Escort them to the border as planned, but don't interfere with their retrieval operation. Make it clear this is a one-time allowance, not a precedent. Then we regroup and figure out how to handle Earth going forward. The Council will see that as weakness. The Council isn't here, Kent said bluntly. I am, and I'm telling you that starting a shooting war in the middle of our largest civilian station would be catastrophic, regardless of who wins. Veller's crystalline body flickered through several colors as he processed the situation. Everything about this felt wrong. The Concordance didn't back down from challenges. They didn't allow member species to dictate terms. But the humans weren't member species anymore, and their fleet was approaching with clear intent. Very well, he said finally. Allow the retrieval operation to proceed, but I want our entire fleet on high alert. If the humans deviate from their stated mission even slightly, we respond with overwhelming force. Understood, Kent said, though his tone suggested he didn't think overwhelming force would be enough if it came to combat. 4 hours later, the human fleet arrived exactly on schedule. The 16 ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, their approach vector calculated to demonstrate both capability and restraint. They weren't trying to hide their military nature, but they also weren't making aggressive maneuvers. Marcus Reed stood in Central Station's primary docking bay, watching through the viewport as the lead human vessel, the CSS Valiant, maneuvered into position. Lieutenant Torres stood beside him, and he could see the relief in her posture despite her rigid military bearing. They came, she said quietly. Of course they came, Marcus replied. Did you ever doubt? For about 14 seconds after the verdict was announced, Torres admitted. Then I remembered we're humans. We don't leave our people behind. The docking procedure was completed in perfect silence. No Concordance officials offered welcome or farewell. No diplomatic pleasantries were exchanged. The humans simply boarded their ships under the watchful eyes of security forces that looked relieved when the last human stepped through the airlock. Marcus was the last to board. He paused at the threshold and turned to look back at Central Station one final time. Somewhere in that massive structure, Commander Thex was probably watching. Maybe Captain Yoren, too. Maybe others who understood that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning. Ambassador Reed, said a voice over the station's intercom. High Chancellor Veller, speaking directly to him. You've made your point. Earth's sovereignty is acknowledged. But understand that you've also made Earth's position clear. You're not part of the Concordance. That means you're not under our protection. Marcus smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Chancellor, with respect, your protection was never something we needed. But your friendship was something we wanted. It's unfortunate you couldn't see the difference. He stepped through the airlock without waiting for a response. On board the CSS Valiant, Captain Jennifer Cross met him with a crisp salute. She was younger than Marcus expected, probably in her early 30s, but her eyes carried the hardness of someone who'd seen combat. Ambassador Reed, welcome aboard, she said. General Stone sends her regards and requests your presence on the command deck at your earliest convenience. How is Earth handling all this? Marcus asked as they walked through corridors that hummed with barely restrained power. Honestly, we're furious, Cross said bluntly. The Concordants invited us to join their civilization, then tried to dictate our development when they realized we weren't as weak as they assumed. The President has called an emergency session of the Planetary Assembly. The vote on how to respond was almost unanimous. Almost. 3 delegates argued for accepting the sanctions to maintain peace, Cross said. They were outvoted 8 billion to 3. Marcus couldn't help but laugh at that. What's the decision then? Cross led him into the command deck, where a holographic display showed both the human fleet and the surrounding Concordance vessels. General Stone's face appeared on the main screen. Transmitted from Earth. Ambassador Reed, Stone said. You'll be pleased to know that Earth has officially declared its independence from Concordance authority. We will not accept their sanctions, their restrictions, or their judgment. As of this moment, humanity is charting its own course among the stars. And if the Concordance responds with military force? Marcus asked. Stone's expression became cold as iron. Then they'll learn what happens when you threaten 8 billion. Humans who've spent their entire history learning how to survive impossible odds. We didn't come to the stars to bow to anyone, Marcus. We came to stand as equals, or not at all. The human fleet began moving, forming up for the journey back to Earth. Behind them, the Concordance escort vessels maintained their distance. Clearly unwilling to provoke a confrontation, Marcus watched Central Station shrink in the view screen and thought about everything that had happened. First contact had failed, but perhaps that failure was necessary. The Concordance needed to understand that humanity wouldn't be controlled, and Earth needed to prove it could stand on its own. What came next would determine whether the galaxy had room for 2 different visions of civilization, or whether only one could survive. The answer to that question would be written in the days ahead. In actions and decisions that neither side could take back, humanity had declared its independence. Now came the hard part, defending it. The chamber was quiet when Commander Vex entered, though tension filled the air like static before a lightning strike. Admiral Kent had summoned him to a private meeting in the secure conference room, 3 levels below the main command center. And the security protocols in place suggested this wasn't a casual conversation. 6 other officers waited inside, representing different species and different branches of the Concordance military. Vex recognized most of them. Veterans of border conflicts, officers who'd actually seen combat rather than just managed it from comfortable positions. Captain Yoren was there, her luminous skin shifting through worried colors. So was Fleet Commander Morax of the Vryn, whose intelligence network made him one of the most informed beings in Concordance space. Thank you for coming. Commander, Kent said, gesturing to an empty seat. What we're about to discuss could be considered treason by some interpretations of Concordance law. Anyone who wishes to leave should do so now. No one moved. Very well, Kent continued. Let's be direct. The human fleet departed 3 days ago. Since then, the Council has been debating how to respond to what they're calling humanity's declaration of war. The humans didn't declare war, Vex objected. They simply refused to accept sanctions. The Council sees no difference, Kent said grimly. They've authorized a military task force to enforce the quarantine of Earth's home system. Any human vessel found in Concordance space will be detained or destroyed. Any species found trading with Earth will face sanctions themselves. Captain Yoren's skin flashed red. That's insane. We're talking about blockading an entire species because they refuse to follow our rules? The Council believes it's necessary to maintain order, Morax said, his voice carefully neutral. If humanity is allowed to defy Concordance authority without consequences, other species might follow. The entire alliance could collapse. Or, Vex said quietly, The alliance could collapse because we're trying to enforce rules through military might rather than mutual benefit. Either way, we're facing a crisis. Kent nodded. Which brings me to why I've gathered you here. The task force being assembled is substantial. 40 warships, including 3 carriers. Enough firepower to overwhelm any defense the humans might have at their home world. Do we know what defenses they have? Asked Colonel Trix, a small mammalian officer from the Pharenic Collective. No, Morax admitted. That's the problem. We know what they showed us at Broken Vale, which was impressive. But we have no idea what they're capable of in their home system, with preparation time and full military deployment. The intelligence gap is enormous. And yet the Council is sending 40 ships anyway, Dex said. Either they're supremely confident or supremely stupid. Both, Kent said bluntly. They believe our numerical advantage, and superior faster than light technology will compensate for any tactical disadvantages. They're wrong, but they won't listen to contrary assessments. Dex felt his combat instincts activate, the same heightened awareness that came before every battle. You're planning something. That's why we're here. I'm providing information, Kent corrected carefully. What you do with that information is your decision. But yes, some of us have concerns about the current approach. Concerns significant enough that we've been meeting quietly to discuss alternatives. What kind of alternatives? Yaren asked. Morax activated a holographic display showing the sector of space containing Earth's system. The task force will arrive at Earth in approximately 16 days, assuming standard faster-than-light travel. The humans will detect them several hours before arrival, giving them time to prepare. If the task force's orders are to enforce a blockade through force, shooting will begin immediately. And, Dex prompted, and I've managed to access some of Earth's historical military records, Morax said. Their entire civilization is built on conflicts that make our border skirmishes look like minor disagreements. They've fought wars that killed millions. They've developed weapons capable of destroying their entire planet. They've survived multiple near-extinction events through sheer determination and adaptability. He highlighted specific data points in the display. Their military doctrine emphasizes something they call asymmetric warfare, fighting smarter rather than harder, using knowledge of terrain, psychology, and enemy weaknesses to overcome superior numbers. They don't fight fair, they fight to win. The Concordance fleet will be entering a system the humans have had time to fortify, Colonel Trix said, understanding dawning in her expression. They'll know the terrain. They'll choose the engagement parameters. And we'll be operating at the extreme range of our supply lines. Exactly, Kent said. This isn't a policing action. It's an invasion of a hostile power's home territory. The Concordance military hasn't conducted an operation like this in over 1,000 years. We've forgotten how.